Hey guys, in this video we're going to be checking out the new KingKong Tiny6 and Tiny7. These are basically Tiny Whip style brushed micro quads. The Tiny6 obviously comes with 6mm motors and the Tiny7 comes with 7mm motors. You can see here the size difference between the two. The 6 is on the left and the 7 is on the right. The 6 comes with 31mm propellers and the 7 comes with 41mm propellers. The motor to motor distance on the Tiny6 is 65 millimeters, and on the Tiny7 it's going to be about 75 millimeters across. So basically here's a size comparison to the original Tiny Whoop. It's basically the same. You get 3-bladed props on the KingKong Tiny6 and 4-bladed on the Tiny Whoop, so they sound a little bit different in the air. But in terms of the size and the weight, they're really identical and they fly almost identical as well. So if you're trying to get into the Tiny Whips and you're looking to build something, I would recommend not bothering to go through the trouble of finding all the parts and building this thing here on the left that I've featured on my channel many times. It's going to cost you a lot more money, and you're not going to get that much better performance compared to the Tiny6. I think the basic version of this is about $60, and the advanced version, which is what I've got here, is about $80, and it comes with 5 batteries, a battery charger, a bunch of extra props and stuff. I'll show you that in a second. Now the Tiny7 here is pretty similar in size to the Cheerson 95S that I reviewed about a week or two ago. The Cheerson model is actually a little bit bigger. It's the 75mm motor to motor on the Tiny7. It's about 80mm motor to motor on the Cheerson model. They both use the 7mm motors, and they fly pretty similarly as well. So let's go over quickly what you get in the box here. They both come in these nice little plastic tubs. If you want to store your model, it'll just pop in there very nicely, and you can just take this out to the field or wherever you want to go fly. It comes with five of these batteries. The Tiny6 comes with these. These are the Tiny Whip style stick batteries. It's the 250 30-60C1S battery, but this is not the JST PH connector. This is the 1.25mm pitch connector, the original type connector. But surprisingly, it doesn't have a lot of issues like the original Tiny Whip did with those connectors. I think they may have done a better job with the connector that's on here. It's silicone wire, not plastic. I didn't have any brownout issues or flight time issues with the batteries that were given to this model. On the Tiny7 you get a much larger battery. This is a 500 milliamp hour. It's called peak power, and it says it's a 5C max charge, a 30C discharge. It doesn't say what the max discharge is, but this one does come with the what's known as the power whip connector. It's the JST PH connector, which is a 2mm pitch connector, and has obviously the appropriate connector on the model itself. The batteries are very snug fit here on the Tiny7. You get a better flight time on the Tiny7 versus the Tiny6 because the battery is so much bigger, but at the same time it's also quite a bit heavier with the battery. I think I got about 4 minutes on this battery. So inside the tub here that you can use for storage, you can take this out. Basically you get a charger here, and this can be used with 6S batteries, even though it says 2S to 4S only on the sticker. I was able to find on the back here, I'm not sure if that's going to be visible or not, it says 2 to 6S on the circuit board. And so I actually tried my 6S Charge Soon battery, and it was no problem charging up these batteries. Okay, so you have a little switch here that'll switch from 200 milliamps to 500 milliamps if you want to change the amount of power that's being sent to the connector. Obviously with these 250s you want to probably charge them at about 200, which is a little bit less than 1C. And obviously for the bigger 500 milliamp hour batteries, you want to charge those at 500 milliamp hours. So it'll take about an hour to fully charge a battery from empty. Alternatively, you can also charge through the USB port here on this side. So you can either use a LiPo with an XT60 connector, 2 to 4S, or a USB connector. They actually sell this separately on Banggood and a variety of places. I'll put links to this if you want to check it out. It says pretty good field charger for both of these type of batteries, for the 1.25 millimeter pitch battery and the 2 millimeter pitch battery. So both models do come with extra sets of canopies here in white, red, and pink. And you also get the same set of props in the same colors. You get a set of red props, a set of white props, and a set of pink props. So they do include some extra pieces and screws and stuff for mounting your flight controller and holding on your motor wires if you need those. And they're also including prop removal tool as well. So I think this is why I'm thinking that this is probably the best deal for getting into the Tiny Whips, is that you're going to get all this stuff here, basically 5 batteries, and you're ready to go. You just have to bind to your transmitter and you can fly, and you don't have to do any building, you don't have to swap any parts out. Everything will just work out of the box. And even though it came with Betaflight 3.0.1, I would recommend upgrading that to Betaflight 3.1.7, which is the latest version. I think it flew better on that version versus the older one. I'm not exactly sure why, but it just did in my opinion. So I would recommend flashing that. The thing about the way this is set up is there's a flight controller board that has basically everything, and includes also the video transmitter. And this is what this little antenna here is for. It's a little 25 milliwatt video transmitter with a linear antenna. You get this other antenna here at the back. That's actually your antenna for the receiver. For my Tiny6, I couldn't get to the bind button on this one. It was buried under the camera. So I had to actually take the little canopy off, just take off these 2 screws, and then you have to bind by pressing the bind button and turning on your transmitter, and that'll bind your receiver. On the Tiny7, I believe it had the same receiver as the FlySky receiver, but the receiver was mounted reversed, so the bind button was actually accessible, and I could actually bind it without taking the canopy off. The receiver is PPM only, and I was not able to get failsafe to work on these receivers. I think for whatever reason in the FlySky protocol, under this is the 2nd generation protocol, PPM does not work for failsafe, and I just couldn't get it to work. But I didn't have any dropouts or failsafes in terms of flying around my house. I don't recommend going too far with these. These are really meant for indoor flights anyway, and as long as you're pretty close, you shouldn't have any issues. I did fly this with my Turnigy Evolution, so if you guys are wondering if these will work with the Turnigy Evolution, they definitely do, because they do the 2nd generation 2.8 protocol. So definitely, if you're interested in flying with the Evolution, these will work for sure. So as I mentioned previously, the video transmitter is built into the flight controller, and there's actually a button next to the bootloader button that changes your frequency and bands. There's only 16 channels, so you can basically just keep pressing the button and eventually finding your channel. There is 2 LEDs that you can see that will correspond to this chart here that's in this manual, and you can find your frequency that way. Basically, there's 2 lights, and you just have to match up the light sequence to whatever frequency you want. It defaults obviously to this first one here, 56, 58, and then as you press as you press the frequency button, it'll advance to each one of these one by one, and that's where this little button is here on the flight controller. It's the one on the right to the which is the bootloader button. And yeah, here's just a quick look at the manual. It's pretty brief. There's it just goes over some specs for the Tiny6 and Tiny7, and it's in super tiny print here. I don't know if you'll be able to read that or not, but if you want to see the stats, you can take a look at those. It goes over all the parts for the advanced version, and goes over a quick little guide in terms of firmware upgrading here. You want to basically pick the SB Racing firmware. I obviously upgraded to 3.1.7, and these were the settings I used to upgrade those, and then these are the default gyro and PID loop settings. So it's pretty basic. I'll actually go over the Betaflight settings I use for both of these in a moment. Okay, here's some weight measurements. This is the Tiny6 without the battery, and comes in at 20.5 grams. And if you throw on the battery here, with the battery it comes in at about 27 grams. And for comparison, this is the Tiny Whip that I've built. This one comes in at 21.3 grams. We'll just throw on the same battery, and 27.8 grams with that battery. This is the Tiny7, and it's a bit heavier. It's 32 grams without the battery. Throw on the battery here, and it comes in at 44 grams with that 500 milliamp hour battery. So even though it's got 7mm motors and 41 millimeter propellers, it is a lot heavier than the Dust X58, which has brushless motors. So when I fly this, I can definitely feel the difference in terms of the weight and the power. So these are my Betaflight settings. As I mentioned before, I did upgrade these both to 3.1.7, and I actually put the same settings in both of them if you guys are curious. I probably should tune them a little bit differently, but I just got them sort of generally flying in a way that I like. I think I would have to spend a lot more time to tune them a little bit more precisely, but I think they flew pretty well as is. And here are my port settings. This is the configuration page. I didn't really change a whole lot. I did enable air mode because I like air mode. Here are my failsafe settings. These are my PIDs. And these are the receiver settings. So the flight characteristics of the Tiny6 are pretty much identical, if not better, than the original Tiny Whip that I built. It weighs about a gram less, so I think it actually flies a little bit better and has a little bit longer flight time than the Tiny Whip that I built. So as I mentioned before, there really is no reason to build your own Tiny Whip anymore. If you're going to go out and get into the Tiny Whip races, this is probably the one to get. It's already built, has good motors on there, good power, and it works with FlySky, FreeSky, and Spectrum. So you can see here I can do all kinds of precise movements with it. I have no problems controlling it. It has plenty of power to do what I needed to do. I actually really like this one a lot. Actually, probably even more than the Tiny7, because it's the Tiny7 is quite a bit heavier, and I'll explain that a little bit later when I show you that flight footage. Tiny7 flies pretty similarly to the Tiny6, but it is quite a bit heavier, and it actually feels heavier in the air. Even though the props are bigger and the motors are bigger, the weight is more noticeable on the 7 versus the 6. So, I'm not really sure if it's advisable to get the 7 over the 6. The 7 is a little bit more expensive. It is faster in the straightaways, so if you're looking for all-out speed in a larger area, then the 7 is probably the one to go for, because the 6 is a little bit slower in the straightaways. But at the same time, if you're on a course where there's a lot of turns and quick course changes, the 7 is probably not going to be any better than the 6, because of the extra weight. It takes a lot more, piloting to get around the turns and stuff. You have to really manage the throttle a lot better, give it more punch in the turns to make quick direction changes, versus the 6. It's a little bit more, because it's so much lighter. It seems to take the turns a little bit better than the 7. And also the 7's bigger, so it's a little bit harder to manage the tight spaces. I was able to still do that, but I did end up bumping into a lot of things. I didn't really cut this stuff out in the video, but I just bumped into something right there. But yeah, you do manage to bump into quite a bit more things compared to the 6, even though it isn't that much bigger. For whatever reason, I just managed to bump into more stuff. So this will wrap up my review of the Tiny6 and Tiny7. I recommend the 6 over the 7 just because of the better flight characteristics, even though it has a little bit shorter flight time. And yeah, there really is no reason to go out and build a custom built Tiny Whip unless you're a pro and are looking for the absolute best Tiny Whip out there. If you're such a pilot, you're probably going to build one anyway and spend 3 times as much money anyway, so don't listen to what I have to say. However, if you're looking to save a few bucks and get into the Tiny Whip races, this is definitely one to look at. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.